Yoon Tae-ho stood in front of the small mirror in Earth's embassy quarters and adjusted his dark tie. The room was barely large enough for two people. The walls were thin. He could hear the recycling vent humming behind him, and the low rumble of alien conversation from the hallway outside. Earth's embassy on Aethon Ring was the smallest one on the entire station. It sat between a supply closet and a waste processing room. 40 years of membership in the Galactic Concord, and this was what humanity had earned. A room the size of a storage container, and a single seat on the council floor that sat lower than every other chair in the chamber. He looked at the Concord seal, pinned to his jacket, a silver circle with 12 curved lines reaching inward, representing unity. He had worn it every day for 20 years. 20 years of smiling at creatures who looked at him the way a person looks at a dog that has learned to sit. The door slid open, and Han Ji-soo stepped in, holding a data tablet against her chest. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes and a calm voice that hit a fire Tae-ho had noticed the first day she joined his team. She spoke 4 alien trade languages fluently. She was the smartest person in the embassy, and the Concord had never once asked her name. "Ambassador, the session begins in 40 minutes, she said. "Your petition is listed 7th on the agenda." Tae-ho nodded. "And the mood out there?" Jisoo paused. "The Tannock delegation arrived early. Delegate Olmore has been talking loudly in the atrium. He called our petition amusing." Tae-ho said nothing. He had heard worse. He had spent 2 decades hearing worse. The petition was simple. Earth had joined the Galactic Concord 40 years ago. At the time, humanity was classified as a developing ward, a category the Concord used for species they considered too young, too unstable, or too primitive to govern themselves in galactic affairs. In exchange for protection and a place at the table, Earth signed dozens of treaties. Trade restrictions, military caps, technology embargoes, limits on how many ships they could build, what kind of engines they could develop, how far from their own star they could travel without permission. The Concord called it guidance. Tae-ho called it a leash. But humanity had done everything right. They followed every rule. They hit every benchmark. Their economy grew. Their science advanced, at least as far as the treaties allowed. Their crime rates dropped. Their government stabilized. By every measure the Concord used to judge a species, Earth had passed. And yet, every time humanity asked to be reclassified as a sovereign member, the answer was the same. You are not ready. Today, Tae-ho would ask one more time. The Grand Council chamber was enormous. It was a circular room with hundreds of platforms arranged in rising tiers, each one designed for a different species. Some were filled with water. Some were dark and cold. Some glowed with radiation that would kill a human in minutes. At the very center, on the highest platform, sat Grand Speaker Velith of the Selarhi Dominion. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with pale skin and dark antlers that curved backward from his skull like a crown. His eyes were black and calm. He had led the Concord for 60 years, and in all that time, not one ward species had ever been promoted under his watch. Tae-ho walked to Earth's platform. It was small, low, and positioned near the edge of the chamber where the lighting was dim. He placed his data tablet on the podium, straightened his back, and waited for his turn. When his name was called, the chamber barely quieted. A few delegates glanced down. Most continued their own conversations. Tae-ho did not let it bother him. He had prepared this speech for 3 years. He began calmly. He presented data, growth rates, stability indexes, cultural development metrics. He quoted the Concord's own standards and showed, point by point, that Earth met every single one. His voice was steady. His words were clear. He was not begging. He was making a case. He was halfway through his 3rd point when Delegate Olmore stood up. Olmore was massive, even by Tannock standards. His skin was dark gray and thick like stone. His voice was deep enough to vibrate the floor. He did not wait for permission to speak. He simply spoke, and the chamber let him, because the Tanakh hegemony had 9 battle fleets, and a seat on the inner circle. Honored delegates, Omar said, his voice carrying easily across the room. Before we waste more time, let me remind this chamber of what we are dealing with. He activated a holographic display. A document appeared in the air above the chamber, enormous and glowing. It was Earth's original ward assessment, written 40 years ago by the first Concord survey team to visit the planet. Omar read it aloud, slowly, with obvious enjoyment. Cognitively adequate, but culturally juvenile, prone to internal violence, tribal and social organization, unfit for autonomous governance in the current developmental phase. The chamber laughed. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to make the sound fill the room and press against Tejo's chest like a hand. Omar kept reading. He pulled out passages about human wars, human pollution, human poverty. He displayed images from Earth's history, carefully selected to make humanity look brutal and stupid. The laughter grew. Some delegates pointed, some shook their heads in theatrical pity. Tejo stood still. His hands did not shake. His face did not change. Grand Speaker Velith let it continue for nearly 5 minutes before raising one long hand. The chamber quieted. Velith looked down at Tejo with something that was shaped like sympathy, but carried no warmth. Ambassador Yoon, Velith said, the Concord appreciates Earth's continued desire for growth. However, at this time, the Council does not find sufficient evidence of readiness. He paused. Furthermore, in light of recent concerns regarding human military expansion within permitted limits, the Council has approved a new stewardship provision. An oversight committee will be stationed on Earth to supervise military deployments and resource allocation. This is, of course, for humanity's benefit. The chamber applauded. Tejo looked at Velith for a long time. Then he looked across the chamber, slowly, at every delegation that had laughed. He memorized nothing. He did not need to. He had known these faces for 20 years. He picked up his data tablet, turned, and walked out. Jisoo followed him into the corridor. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were wet and furious. She opened her mouth to speak, but Tejo was already walking, his steps calm and even, his face quiet as stone. They reached the embassy. Tejo stood in the center of that tiny, humiliating room for a long time. Then he spoke, and his voice was so soft that Jisoo almost missed it. Get me a secure line to Admiral Kang. The news reached Earth in under an hour. Every major network carried it. Footage from the council chamber, recorded by a sympathetic junior delegate from one of the smaller species, spread across every screen on the planet. The laughter, the old document, Velith's cold, smiling denial, the new stewardship provision that would put alien officials on human soil with authority over human soldiers and human resources. Earth did not take it quietly. In Seoul, crowds gathered outside the United Earth Government Complex, holding signs and shouting into the night. In Jakarta, workers walked off factory floors. In Nairobi, university students burned a replica of the Concord seal in the central square. In every city, on every continent, the reaction was the same. Not sadness, not fear, fury. Deep, hot, and patient, the kind of anger that does not burn out because it has been building for 40 years. Tejo watched the feeds from his quarters on Aethon Ring. Jisoo sat beside him, scrolling through message after message from Earth's government. Emergency sessions, demands for action, calls for withdrawal from the Concord. They want blood, Jisoo said quietly. No, Tejo said, his eyes still on the screen. They want dignity. That is harder to give and harder to take. But we will do both. He closed the feed and opened a secure communication channel. The encryption was not Concord standard. It was something Earth had built in secret, layered in codes that no alien system had ever seen. The call connected to a ship stationed at the edge of the Sol system, far from any Concord sensor range. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Vice Admiral Kang Mirai. She was in her 50s like Tejo, with gray streaks in her black hair pulled back tight. Her uniform was crisp, her eyes sharp, and her expression was the kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from years of preparation. She commanded the carrier Bekdu, and the hidden fleet that orbited with it in the cold dark beyond Neptune. I watched the whole thing, Mirai said before Tejo could speak. Every second. Then you know, Tejo replied. I have known for 20 years, Tejo. I was just waiting for you to stop hoping they would change. There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. Tejo nodded slowly. How long do you need? He asked. We have been ready for 3 years. I just need the word. Not yet. I have one more thing to do on this station first, but soon. They looked at each other through the screen. Two old friends who had spent their entire adult lives preparing for a moment they hoped would never come. Then Mirai smiled, just barely, and cut the connection. On a hollowed-out asteroid, deep in the belt between Mars and Jupiter, a man named Shin Do-hyun sat in a room full of screens and drank cold tea. He was thin, quiet, and had the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. This was by design. Do-hyun was the director of Project Hate, Earth's most classified program, and he had spent the last 30 years making sure no one in the galaxy knew it existed. The project had started small. A handful of scientists, working in secret, asking a simple question. What if we did not obey the technology ceiling? What if, while the Concorde watched our public labs and counted our permitted ships, we built something else entirely, in the places they never thought to look? The answer was in the asteroid around him. Pulse-fold drives, faster and more agile than anything the Concorde had ever designed. Ghost lattice stealth fields that could hide a ship from every known sensor type in the galaxy. Resonance disruptors, weapons that could reach into an enemy vessel and shut down its shields, its engines, its weapons, without killing a single crew member. And the crown jewel, the Hate protocol itself, a cyber warfare system so advanced it could infiltrate and freeze the entire Concorde communication and defense network in under 90 seconds. Mirai visited the lab through a secure holographic link. Do-hyun showed her the final status reports. Everything was green. Every system tested. Every weapon ready. You understand what this means, Do-hyun said, not as a question. The moment we use any of this, every treaty we ever signed becomes proof that we lied. We will be the species that smiled and nodded while building weapons in the dark. Some will call us no better than the species that caged us. Mirai looked at the data scrolling across the screen. 30 years of hidden work. Thousands of scientists who gave their careers to a project they could never talk about. Soldiers who trained on ships that officially did not exist. They put a leash on us and called it love, she said. I would rather be feared and free than pitied and caged. Wouldn't you? Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Back on Athon Ring, Jisoo had her own mission. As a diplomatic attaché for a ward species, she had access to the Concorde's shared data servers. It was part of the ward agreement. Earth was required to share all its military and scientific data with the Concorde openly. In return, Earth's representatives could access certain Concorde systems for administrative purposes. The Concorde had designed the arrangement to keep Earth transparent and controllable. They had never considered that someone might use that access in the other direction. Jisoo worked through the night, quietly copying defense network schematics, fleet deployment schedules, communication relay maps, and sensor grid configurations. She moved carefully, pulling data in small pieces, leaving no trace. By morning, she had a complete blueprint of every weakness in the Concorde's military infrastructure. She encrypted the files and sent them to Mireille through Tejo's private channel. Meanwhile, Tejo was writing. Not a speech this time. A formal request invoking an ancient Concorde bylaw that most delegates had forgotten existed. The law stated that any ward species facing new sanctions had the right to one final address before the full council. It was an old tradition, written in a time when the Concorde still pretended to care about fairness. No one had used it in over 200 years. Tejo submitted the request at midnight. By morning, Velith had approved it. The Grand Speaker saw no risk. What could the humans do? Make another speech? Present more charts? Velith scheduled the address for the dawn session, the earliest and least attended slot, as a final small insult. Tejo read the confirmation and set down his tablet. He looked at Jisoo. Tomorrow morning, he said. Tell Admiral Kang. Jisoo sent the message. Somewhere in the darkness beyond Neptune, Mireille received it on the bridge of the Baekdu. She read it once, closed the channel, and opened a fleet-wide broadcast. All ships, this is Vice Admiral Kang. Begin pre-deployment sequence. We move at 0400 standard. Destination is Sereth Prime, Aethon Ring. Stealth protocols active. No exceptions. Across the black emptiness of the outer solar system, lights began to flicker on. Engines that had never been detected powered up without a sound. Ships that did not officially exist slipped out of their hiding places among the frozen rocks and dust. On the stealth frigate Dokkaebi, Captain Park Soo-jin leaned back in her command chair and watched her crew run through their final checks. She was young for a captain, just 38, with quick hands and a reputation for staying calm when everything around her was falling apart. She had trained for this mission for 6 years and had never told a single person outside the fleet what she did for a living. Her first officer looked at her. Captain, all systems green. We are ready. Soo-jin smiled in the dim blue light of her bridge. Good. Let us go remind them what we are. Tejo woke before the station's artificial dawn. He showered, dressed, and stood in front of the mirror one last time. He wore a plain black suit, no decoration, no color, and no Concorde seal. He looked at the small silver pin sitting on the desk where he had placed it the night before. He had worn it for 20 years. He left it there. Jisoo was waiting in the corridor. She noticed the missing pin immediately, but said nothing about it. She had learned over the past 2 years that Tejo never did anything without purpose. Every word, every gesture, every silence meant something. The chamber is filling, she said. More delegates than expected. Word spread about the final address. I think they are curious. Curious, Tejo repeated, and something passed behind his eyes, something cold and sharp that Jisoo had never seen before. Good. They walked through the station's wide corridors, past alien delegations preparing for the day. A group of Tanakh officers saw Tejo and nudged each other, smiling. A Salarhi administrator looked at him with polite disinterest, the way one might look at furniture being moved from one room to another. Tejo walked past all of them without changing his pace. The Grand Council chamber was nearly full. Velith had scheduled the address for the dawn slot to minimize attendance, but the opposite had happened. News of Earth's humiliation the day before had spread through the station like fire, and now everyone wanted to see what the humans would do next. Most expected entertainment. A few expected tears. None expected what was coming. Delegate Omur was already in his seat on the Tanakh platform, high above the chamber floor. He was leaning back with his arms crossed, his stone-gray face split by a wide smile. When he saw Tejo walking toward the central podium, he spoke loudly enough for the nearby delegations to hear. Perhaps it will do a trick for us. Laughter rippled through the surrounding tiers. Teho did not look up. He stepped onto Earth's low platform, set down a single data tablet, and stood with his hands at his sides. Jisoo took her place behind him, her heart hammering in her chest, her face perfectly still. Grand Speaker Velith raised one pale hand. The chamber quieted, slowly, like water settling after a stone is dropped. The Council recognizes Ambassador Yoon Taeho of Earth, exercising the right of final address under Concord Bylaw 17. Ambassador, you may speak. Taeho looked out at the chamber. Hundreds of species, thousands of eyes, platforms stretching up into the curved ceiling like the inside of some enormous shell. He had stood here so many times, always looking up. Today he stood straight and looked forward. He began quietly. Thank you, Grand Speaker. I will not take much of the Council's time. I know how valuable it is. A few delegates shifted in their seats. The tone was different from yesterday. There were no charts, no data, no careful arguments. Just a man in a black suit, speaking plainly. 40 years ago, humanity was welcomed into this Concord. We were told it was a partnership. We were given treaties to sign, rules to follow, and limits to accept. We signed them. We followed them. We accepted them. Every single one. He paused. We were told that our ships could not travel beyond a certain range. We obeyed. We were told our weapons could not exceed a certain power. We obeyed. We were told our science must be shared openly, and that our military must be transparent, and that our development must be guided by species who knew better. We obeyed. For 40 years, Earth did everything this council asked. The chamber was quiet now. Not the distracted quiet of boredom, but the tense quiet of attention. And in return, Taeho continued, his voice still calm, still level. We were laughed at. We were called juvenile. We were told we were not ready, again and again, by species who never once defined what ready means. We watched our children grow up under a sky they were told they could never own. We watched our scientists hide their best work because the treaties said they were not allowed to be too smart. We watched our soldiers train for battles they were told they would never be permitted to fight. He let the silence hold for 3 long seconds. Yesterday, Delegate Omor read aloud from our ward assessment. He shared the part that called us prone to internal violence. The chamber laughed. Taeho looked directly at Omor. I did not laugh, because that document is not wrong. Humans are capable of great violence. We have fought each other for thousands of years. We have burned cities and split atoms and poisoned our own rivers. This is true. The chamber stirred. This was not the script anyone had expected. But here is what that document did not say, Taeho continued, and now his voice changed. It did not rise. It deepened. It became something heavy and certain, like stone settling into the earth. It did not say that we learned, that every war taught us something, that every failure made us build again, stronger and smarter than before. It did not say that the same species that burned its own cities also crossed its own oceans, split its own atoms for power, and reached its own moon with nothing but mathematics and courage. It did not say that we are the single most stubborn form of life this galaxy has ever produced. Omor's smile was gone. You looked at us, Taeho said, his gaze sweeping across the chamber, and you saw something small. You saw a species that bleeds easily and dies young and fights with itself. And you decided that this made us lesser. That was not our failure. It was yours. Because you mistook our pain for weakness, and you mistook our patience for submission. He stopped. The chamber was completely silent. Even the ambient noise of the station seemed to have faded, as if the walls themselves were listening. As of this moment, Taeho said, Earth formally withdraws from the Galactic Concord. The The silence broke. A wave of sound moved through the chamber. Gasps, shouts, the low rumble of alien voices overlapping in confusion. Velith leaned forward on his platform, his black eyes narrowing. Every treaty signed in the last 40 years is dissolved, Tejo continued over the noise. Every restriction, every provision, every clause of the Ward Agreement. All of it ends now. Omor stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over the delegations below him. You dare? You have nothing. A handful of patrol boats and a single system. The Concorde has 12 battle fleets. You would be crushed before your ships left orbit. Tejo looked at him. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a small device on the podium. It was no larger than a coin, smooth and black. He pressed it once. Every screen in the chamber changed. Every holographic display, every data panel, every projection surface in the Grand Council chamber switched to a single live feed. The view showed the space outside Aethon Ring. Stars, darkness, and then, as if the universe itself was pulling back a curtain, ships appeared. They came out of nothing. One moment there was empty space. The next, there were dozens of vessels, fully armed, in perfect formation, hanging in the void like wolves that had been watching from the tree line all along. The carrier Baekdu, enormous and bristling with launch bays. The stealth frigate Dokkaebi, sleek and dark. Strike ships, escort cruisers, electronic warfare platforms, all of them running technology that no species in the chamber had ever seen before. The ghost lattice stealth fields dropped simultaneously, and the fleet appeared as if it had always been there, waiting, patient, and ready. The chamber went dead silent. Tejo stood at the podium, the glow of the fleet reflected on every screen around him, and spoke his final words. We did not come here to beg. We came to inform you. Earth is no longer asking for sovereignty. Earth is exercising it. He paused, and his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. Any species that wishes to respect that will find us generous neighbors. Any species that does not will find us ready. He stepped back from the podium. No one moved. No one spoke. Velith sat frozen on his high platform, his mouth slightly open, his antlers casting long shadows in the blue light of the displays. Omor stood with his hands at his sides, staring at the screen, his gray face empty of everything. Then, from the far side of the chamber, a single sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic clapping. It came from Observer Quillen, the small insectoid diplomat from the Mirith Collective. Quillen had learned the gesture from human cultural archives years ago, and had never found the right moment to use it. This was the right moment. The sound echoed through the enormous chamber, alone and steady, and for reasons that no species present could fully explain, it was the most unsettling thing any of them had ever heard. Tejo walked out. Jisoo followed. The chamber emptied in chaos. Delegations that had sat in polite formation for decades scrambled from their platforms, like animals sensing a storm. Diplomatic aides ran through the corridors, clutching data tablets, sending encrypted messages to their home worlds. Some species sealed their embassy doors. Others opened them wide and began reaching out to anyone who would answer. On the observation deck of Aethon Ring, a crowd of alien diplomats and officers pressed against the transparent walls, staring at the fleet that now hung in the space outside. The ships were unlike anything in the Concorde registry. Their hulls were dark, angular, and covered in panels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with a precision that was almost unsettling, each ship holding its position without the slightest drift, as if nailed to the void. In the center of the crowd, Delegate Omor stood with his arms folded, watching the human carrier Baekdu rotate slowly against the backdrop of stars. His face was hard, but his eyes moved quickly, counting ships, estimating tonnage, calculating range. He did not like what the numbers told him. He turned to a Tannock military aide beside him and spoke quietly. The aide's expression went pale. High above, in his private chambers, Grand Speaker Velith stood at his own window and looked at the fleet with something he had not felt in 60 years of leadership. Uncertainty. The human ships should not exist. The treaties forbade this level of technology. The monitoring systems should have detected construction on this scale. And yet, here they were, fully armed, fully operational, and completely invisible until Tejo pressed that device. Velith did what he had always done when faced with a challenge to the Concord's authority. He responded with force. He opened a priority channel to the Solarhi 3rd Armada, stationed 2 systems away, and issued a single order. Come to Athon Ring. Restore order. Escort the human ships out of neutral space. The 3rd Armada arrived within the hour. 200 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a wave of light and energy that lit up the space around the station like a second sunrise. They were enormous. Solarhi dreadnoughts, each one 5 times the size of the largest human vessel, covered in layered armor and bristling with weapons that could crack a moon in half. They formed a wall between the station and the human fleet, and the message was clear. Go home or be sent home. Omur watched from the observation deck and allowed himself a smile. This was more like it. The humans had surprised everyone with their little show, but surprise only works once. Now came reality, and reality was 200 warships with enough firepower to turn Earth's fleet into dust. On the bridge of the Baekdu, Vice Admiral Kang Mirai sat in her command chair and watched the Armada take position. Her bridge crew was tense but disciplined. Every officer was at their station, every screen alive with data. The Solarhi ships outnumbered them nearly 4-1, and each individual ship was larger and more heavily armed. Admiral, her tactical officer said, the Armada commander is hailing us. Mirai nodded. Put him through. The face that appeared on screen was Solarhi, tall, pale, with the same dark antlers as Velith, but younger and sharper. His voice carried the bored authority of someone who had never lost a battle and did not expect to start now. Human vessel, you are in violation of Concord space regulation. You will power down your weapons, deactivate your engines, and prepare to be escorted to the Sol system. You have 5 minutes to comply. Mirai looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who has not done the reading. Commander, she said, you are welcome to hold your position. You are not welcome to advance. This is not a negotiation. The Solari commander blinked. Then he cut the channel. 30 seconds later, the Armada began to move forward. Mirai opened a secure line to the asteroid lab. Shin Do-hyun answered immediately. He had been sitting at his console for hours, watching the situation develop on his screens, his cold tea untouched beside him. He already knew what she was going to say. Director Shin, Mirai said, light them up. Do-hyun pressed a single key. The Hate protocol activated. It moved through the Concord's communication network like water through cracks in a wall, silent and unstoppable. It had been designed over 30 years to exploit every vulnerability in the Concord's systems, vulnerabilities that Jisu's data had confirmed and mapped in perfect detail. In 12 seconds, the protocol reached the Solarhi 3rd Armada. In 15 seconds, it was inside every ship. The Armada stopped. Not gradually, not with a slow loss of power. It stopped all at once, as if someone had reached into the heart of every vessel and turned off everything that mattered. Navigation went dark. Weapons went cold. Shield generators powered down with a descending whine that the crews could feel in their bones. Communication arrays went silent. 200 warships, the pride of the Solarhi Dominion, drifted in the void, like dead leaves on still water. Life support held. No one was hurt. Every crew member on every ship was alive and safe. But they could not move, could not shoot, could not call for help, and could not do a single thing except sit in their chairs and stare at blank screens. From the Dokkaebi, Captain Park Sujin fired the resonance disruptors. They were precise, surgical instruments, invisible beams that reached into each ship and stripped away shield harmonics like peeling bark from a tree. The disruptors confirmed what the Hate Protocol had started. The Armada was not just stopped, it was naked. If Mirai wanted to destroy them, she could do it at her leisure, like pushing over a row of standing stones. She did not want to destroy them. Mirai opened an open broadcast channel. Every species on Aethon Ring, every delegation, every officer, every observer heard her voice. This is Vice Admiral Kang Mirai of the United Earth Defense Fleet. The Salarhi Third Armada has been disabled. Their ships are intact. Their crews are unharmed. We could have done far worse, and every military officer listening knows it. She paused, and her voice softened, not with weakness, but with the kind of control that comes from holding enormous power and choosing not to use it. Consider this our first and last demonstration. Earth does not seek war, but Earth will never again accept a cage. The channel closed. Silence filled the space around Aethon Ring like a held breath. On the station, the political aftershocks began immediately. Smaller delegations, species who had spent decades being pushed around or ignored by the Concord's larger members, began sending messages to Earth's embassy. The Mirith Collective, the Dune Assembly, the Horath League. Quiet, careful messages, but messages all the same. Feelers, questions, the first cracks in a structure that had stood for centuries. Observer Quillen, the insectoid diplomat who had clapped alone in the council chamber, walked directly to the Earth Embassy and requested a private meeting with Teho. Jisoo let him in. Quillen sat across from Teho in that tiny room and said in perfectly accented human speech, "I have waited a long time for someone to do what you just did." Omor did not fare as well. He stood on the observation deck, watching the dead Armada drift, when his personal communicator lit up with a priority message from the Tanakh homeworld. He read it once. His government was recalling him. The Tanakh hegemony, which had 9 battle fleets of its own, had done the math. A species that could disable 200 warships without firing a single destructive shot was not a species you provoked. Omor closed the message. His face showed nothing, but his hands, those massive stone-gray hands that had gestured so confidently during yesterday's mockery, were still. In his chambers, Velik sat alone. The room was dark. He had dismissed his staff. On the table in front of him, a single document glowed on a screen, the Ward Assessment of Humanity, 40 years old. He read the line again, prone to internal violence. He understood now, far too late, what that line had always meant. It was not a flaw, it was a feature. A species that fought itself with that much ferocity and survived, that rebuilt after every collapse, that turned its own destruction into fuel for growth, was not a species you kept on a leash. It was a species you treated with respect, or stayed very far away from. He closed the file and stared at the dark ceiling above him. In the Earth Embassy, Teho stood at the observation window. The stars were bright. The disabled Armada drifted in silence. Somewhere out there, Mirai's fleet held position, calm and watchful. Jisoo came to stand beside him. She was exhausted. They both were. But something had changed in the air between them and around them. Something that felt like the first breath after being held underwater for a very long time. "What happens now?" she asked. Teho watched the stars. "Now we find out who we are when no one is holding us down." 3 months passed, and the galaxy did not go to war. This surprised almost everyone, except the humans, who had never wanted war in the first place. Earth looked different from orbit now. Not because the planet had changed, but because what surrounded it had. A proper defense grid circled the world openly, a ring of stations and sensor platforms and patrol routes that no longer hid behind fake cargo manifests or disguised power signatures. Ships bearing the insignia of the United Earth Defense Fleet moved freely through the Sol system, their engines bright, their transponders active, their existence no longer a secret. For the first time in 40 years, humanity's strength was visible to anyone who cared to look. On the surface, the mood was complicated. There was pride, enormous and loud, the kind that showed up in songs and murals and children wearing toy UEDF uniforms. But underneath it, there was something quieter, a cautious awareness that freedom was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much harder one. The first sign that the galaxy was changing came from the Mirith Collective. Observer Quillen, the quiet insectoid diplomat who had clapped alone in the council chamber, arrived on Earth aboard a small silver ship that landed in Geneva on a bright Tuesday morning. He stepped onto human soil as the first official ambassador from any alien species to recognize Earth's full sovereignty outside the Concord framework. The ceremony was simple. Quillen and Tejo stood in a sunlit room with wide windows and signed a bilateral agreement on trade, scientific exchange, and mutual defense consultation. No ward classifications, no oversight provisions, no species ranked above or below another. Just two civilizations agreeing to talk to each other honestly. Quillen, who had spent decades watching the Concord bully and dismiss smaller species while he sat in silence, told Tejo privately afterward that signing the agreement was the proudest moment of his career. "My people are quiet," Quillen said, his thin voice clicking softly around the human words. "We have always been quiet. We watched larger species dominate this galaxy and told ourselves that silence was wisdom. But silence is only wisdom when someone else is willing to speak. You spoke, and now we can too." Tejo poured him a cup of tea, a human gesture of hospitality that Quillen had read about but never experienced. The insectoid held the warm cup in his small hands and did not drink, but held it close, as if the warmth itself was enough. The Mirith visit opened a door, and others followed quickly. Within weeks, 11 more species either formally broke from the Concord or requested independent diplomatic ties with Earth. The Duin Assembly, a coalition of 3 small aquatic species that had been denied voting rights for over a century, were among the first. The Horath League, a loose federation of mining colonies that had been exploited by Tannock trade monopolies for decades, came next. Then the Oreni, then the Shale, then others, one by one, like people stepping out of a building they had been told was the only shelter in a storm, only to discover that the sun was shining. Together, with Earth at the center, they formed something new. Not an empire, not a military alliance, not a copy of the Concord with a human flag on top. They called it the Open Accord, and its founding charter, drafted largely by Tejo and Jisoo over 3 sleepless weeks, was built on principles so simple that the Concord had never thought to try them. Equal representation, regardless of species size or military strength. No ward classifications. No technology ceilings. No leashes dressed up as treaties. The charter's opening line read, "Sovereignty is not earned. It is inherent. No species may grant it, and no species may take it away." While the diplomats built the new order, the soldiers who had made it possible began to stand down. Vice Admiral Kang Mirai traveled to the asteroid lab in the belt, where Project Heite had been born. Shin Do-yun met her at the entrance, looking the same as he always did, thin and forgettable and quietly brilliant. The lab was being decommissioned, not dismantled. The weapons, the drives, the stealth systems, and the Heite protocol were all being placed in secure storage, sealed and monitored, but not destroyed. Earth was not naive enough to throw away the tools that had saved it. But the active research, was ending. The teams were being reassigned to civilian projects, energy systems, medical technology, deep space exploration. Mireille walked through the empty corridors where hundreds of scientists had worked in secret for 30 years. The lights were dimming in sections that had already been cleared out. It felt like walking through the bones of something enormous that had served its purpose and was now resting. "I hope we never use them again," Mireille said. Do-hyun poured 2 glasses of something from a bottle he had been saving. "I designed them hoping the same thing." They drank in silence, standing in the heart of the weapon that had changed the galaxy, and they felt neither proud nor ashamed. They felt tired. The good kind of tired that comes after carrying something heavy for a very long time, and finally being allowed to set it down. Captain Park Soo-jin did not rest. The Dokkaebi and its stealth squadron were reassigned from defense patrol to deep space exploration. The Concorde had mapped the galaxy according to its own interests, focusing on trade routes and resource-rich systems while ignoring vast stretches of space that held no immediate profit. Earth intended to go where the Concorde had never bothered to look. Soo-jin stood on her bridge as the Dokkaebi slipped past the edge of known space, heading into a region of the galaxy that had no name on any chart. Her crew was sharp, excited, and just a little bit afraid, which Soo-jin considered the perfect combination for exploration. She looked at the star field ahead of her, endless and unknown, and felt the same grin she had worn in the dark of the Oort cloud when this all began. Behind them, the Concorde survived, but it was not the same. Membership had dropped. Revenue had fallen. The species that remained were mostly the large, powerful ones who had benefited from the old system and had nowhere else to go. Grand Speaker Velith faced a no-confidence vote 6 weeks after the incident at Aethon Ring. He did not fight it. He stood before a half-empty chamber, the same chamber where Taeho had made his address, and spoke his final words as leader. "We built this Concorde to bring order to a chaotic galaxy," Velith said, his voice slower than it used to be, his antlers seeming less like a crown and more like a weight. "We believed that order meant control, and that control meant safety. We were wrong. We controlled a species that did not need to be controlled, and in doing so, we created the very outcome we feared. Not because they were dangerous, but because we refused to see them as equals. That is not their failure. It is ours." The chamber was quiet. Velith stepped down. No one applauded. On a transit station 3 systems from Tannock Space, Delegate Omur sat on a metal bench and waited for a shuttle home. He had been recalled, reassigned, and quietly removed from every committee he had ever sat on. His government had not punished him publicly, but the message was clear. He was finished. A screen on the wall nearby showed a live broadcast from Earth. The signing of the Open Accord. 12 species, standing together in a hall with high ceilings and wide windows. Taeho was there, in a simple dark suit, shaking hands with Quillen. Jisoo stood behind him, holding the charter. Mireille was in the background, in her dress uniform, speaking with a Duan delegate. Soo-jin's name appeared in a scrolling headline at the bottom of the screen. Something about the Dokkaebi discovering a new system with 3 habitable worlds. Omur watched for a long time. There was nothing left to say. On Aethon Ring, Earth's new embassy was finished. It was a proper space, full-sized, with wide windows that looked out on the stars. It was positioned on the station's main diplomatic corridor between the Mirith Collective and the Duan Assembly, and it had the same high ceilings and good lighting as every other sovereign embassy on the ring. Taeho stood at the observation window, the same window where he had stood on the worst night of his life 3 months ago. The view was the same, stars and void and the slow rotation of the station, but everything else was different. Jisoo found him there as she always did. "Ambassador," she said, "the Horath League delegate is asking for you. Something about a joint agricultural research proposal." Taeho nodded, but did not move right away. He stood at the window a moment longer, looking out at the galaxy that had tried to keep humanity small and quiet and contained, and had discovered too late that some things cannot be contained. Jisoo watched him. "Are you happy?" she asked. Taeho thought about it. He thought about the tiny room where this has started, the laughter in the council chamber, the years of smiling at creatures who never learned his name. He thought about Mireille in the dark, and Dohyun in his asteroid, and Sujin flying into the unknown. He thought about Earth, turning slowly in the light of its star, stubborn and bruised and unbroken. "Happy?" he said. "I do not know, but I will tell you what I am." "What?" He looked at the stars. "Free." Outside, the galaxy turned. Empires rose and fell. Species came and went. But, in one small corner of one ordinary spiral arm, a blue world circled a yellow star, and its people walked among the others, with their backs straight and their eyes open. They were not the oldest species, or the largest, or the most advanced, but they were free, and they were generous, and they were no longer afraid. And that in the end was enough.